Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello and welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, episode 68. So we are closing in on Christmas. I think this is going out on the 16th of December. If you're listening to it on the day it's released, the 16th of December. And we have a fantastic guest with us today, someone who I have met fairly recently, but I was highly impressed with the technical things that he did, but also the service I received and his knowledge all around the subject that we're going to be talking about today, which is why I've got him on the podcast today. But first of all, before we do that and introduce our guest for today, I'd like to say welcome to the usual hosts. And I will change up the order a bit because of what was mentioned last week. Mr. Paul Bassett in Putney. How are you, Paul?
I'm all right. Like I've come prepared, with a great monologue. No, I'm fine. I'm good. It's been a good week, ish.
Okay, good. And Mr. Peter Lant is currently isolating in Bath.
He is.
How are you doing, Pete? You okay?
I'm doing all right. It's weird, because I'm isolating because I've got COVID. Don't worry, you can't catch it online, can you? It's not a computer virus. I shouldn't laugh. Is it funny? Is it not? You know what I mean? It's not been great for everyone, has it? But it's one. I'll laugh at everything.
It's going to be the world, isn't it?
It's weird because basically I just feel like I've got a bit of a cold and that's it. And whether that's lifestyle, whether it's the vaccine, whatever, because I'm double jabbed as well, so. I just feel quite fortunate that it hasn't knocked me out, basically. So the only problem is I've got to spend 10 days in the house, which isn't easy. I'm only on day 2 and I'm going mental.
You could do lots of pistol squats and lots of pressing and lots of Indian clubs and lots of everything for 10 days.
I hit a flying crow pose for the first time this morning as well in my pajamas. So that was quite nice.
Brilliant.
Is that where you do yoga while jumping?
No.
Okay, guys. So the guest we have today is Owen Hutchins from My Vital Metrics, which is he'll tell you all about it in a minute, but it is I'll call it a clinic. I'm not sure if technically it's a clinic, but it's in London, Finsbury Circus, only a couple of minutes walk from Liverpool Street. And I met Owen a couple of weeks back where I went there for a DEXA scan and a body map. And like I say, I was there with a friend of the show and a client of Unique Results, Mr. Graham Harris. We had a really fantastic time with Owen. Like I say, blown away by the knowledge he's got, not just around the services he provides, but everything kind of around that and about that to do with health and assessment. So, and with it being December, like I said, I thought it'd be really good to speak to Owen, because people, if they're looking to start a fitness journey or looking to make some kind of lifestyle change in the new year, it's really good to know where you're starting from. And Owen's an expert around all those things. So first of all, welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, Owen. And would you like to just tell our listeners kind of a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do now, and kind of your journey to what you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for the intro, James. I've been a sports therapist and a personal trainer for around 19 or 20 years now. And I originally trained in Australia and started working there. And then shortly after that, in about 2004, I moved to the UK and started working in the industry here. I've kind of been kind of around the circuit with kind of sports massage, with sports nutrition, with personal training and all of that. What basically has brought me to My Vital Metrics was in 2013 I returned to Australia and I was working out of there and training myself. And it was the first time I'd come across getting a DEXA scan for body composition and starting to use that in my own training for the first time. And I was kind of blown away by kind of how much specificity I was able to get. I was able to get a hold of kind of accurate statistics on what was going on inside my body that I had been kind of chasing or just guessing at up until that point. And I'm from Sydney, so Sydney is a city of 4 million people or so, and there are at least three or four different places offering kind of DEXA scans for both composition side as well as the bone density side, and I guess we'll talk about that soon. But in 2017, I kind of came back and realized that there was virtually nobody doing this over here. Looked into it, I realized why, and that was that there was a bit of a legislative uncertainty within Europe. The European legislation hadn't considered the possibility of what is effectively a very large-scale medical machine being used in a non-medical context. So there was this legislative uncertainty. So I'd hatched a business plan and kind of really wanted to bring this to the UK market, but was somewhat delayed by that. But in 2019, Public Health England happened to be finishing off a report, which they did in 2019, which addressed this specifically. Should body composition scans on a DEXA, not referred by a GP or anything, be allowed? And the conclusion they came to was that, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fine. It's completely safe. Within some limits, we don't want to be scanning people every single day, but they concluded that it was fine. And so I kind of pulled the trigger on this plan to bring DEXA scanning kind of to the UK, to London. And from there, I actually kind of thought, okay, but I want there to be more than that. Like, there are so many more figures and statistics available that could really help people along their way. And so, through understanding and doing some research, I kind of found that, what you experienced, James, a 3D body scan made a really good complement to a DEXA in terms of getting like an actual 3D image, something that people can kind of really relate to, seeing themselves from every angle, getting all of the circumference measurements at the same time. And then, for our more advanced scans, like the resting metabolic rate, kind of being able to measure directly something that a lot of people kind of throw around, things like, oh, I've got a fast metabolism, I've got a slow metabolism, being able to test that directly. And then, thinking more on the athlete side of things, our athletes do quite like the VO2 max tests and what that tells them. So in short, I hope that wasn't too much of a ramble, but that's kind of where I'm from and how I came to my vital metrics. And so we've been going since the beginning of 2020, and it's been great.
It's a really great setup that you've got from experience of coming to see you myself. And I think, like you say, most people are familiar with, I mean, we can broaden the conversation out to, I suppose, kind of assessments and measurements and things that people currently do and how it might compare to, I mean, most people, or many people, certainly many of my clients now, have got these scales that are maybe in their bathroom or something that they stand on, and it gives it feeds back via Bluetooth to their phone, and it gives them like their weight and it often gives like a body fat percentage and maybe a hydration level and a visceral fat number and a muscle mass percentage, and you get all these stats from there. But I suppose, you can pick up those scales for less than £50, I suppose. And you were telling me, I know when we spoke, how much the DEXA scan machines cost when you get them. So the degree of I suppose accuracy and of depth that you get from the DEXA scan. I mean, I was blown away with the fact that I think in general the bone density was good, the fat level was good, the visceral fat level was good. But you actually said to me, you need to have more, or I'd like to see you have a bit more muscle on your body. And there was a certain reading that I think mine was 19.3, and you said you'd like it to be over 19.8 for men. So that was really interesting feedback for me to think, well, I train quite hard, and have done for years and years. So, for people who maybe don't, or, am I doing something wrong, or can I do something better? So I think that it was in that kind of consultation period with you after we had the scans that I got loads of value with you actually breaking down the figures and telling me what they actually mean. So, I mean, just for people listening at home, what is the, these machines that people usually use at home and may get for, how accurate are they? What value do they have? If you kind of can give us your opinion on that.
Yeah, so the fundamental technology that they all work off is called bioelectrical impedance, and the science behind that is very simply, it runs a current through your body through the 2 points that you are attached to the machine. So sometimes that's, if it's just a standard scale, that's your 2 feet, so it'll run a current up one leg and down the other. Some of the more advanced ones, a couple of £100, will have a little handhold as well. So, and then it's able to run a current kind of, up one leg through one hand, down one leg through the other hand, all of that kind of stuff. What it's doing is it's measuring how much that current is impeded. So how much of the current makes it to the receiving sensor. And the idea behind that is simply that muscle is wet tissues and will conduct the electricity. Fat will not. So that's all it's doing. The more fat you have, the more of the current gets impeded, and therefore the machine is able to sort of say, okay, well, only this much of the current got impeded, made it through to the sensor. So therefore, this person's at this kind of body fat level. The way that they've constructed the science is by taking readings and cross testing these people on a DEXA machine. So this is what they say about all of these things, is that they are cross-calibrated to a DEXA. The difficulty comes in that our things like our hydration level can massively affect the amount of that electricity that kind of passes through. So even the tests for which kind of there has been some scientific data to sort of say, okay, it's not too bad. Those are on the machines that are several £1,000s. Sometimes you might find them, the in-body things in gyms. But they are still hugely variable, hugely variable from test to test. And people will have that, will know that. If you hop on it every single day, you might find that your body fat fluctuates several percent every day. Now, do we know that the body fat can't really fluctuate several percent every day? Absolutely, we know that. So that means that the reading itself must be off. So for those things to get an absolute figure, it's very, very difficult. Very difficult. You won't really get a meaningful figure that you can kind of use and sort of pin that and say, this is my body fat percentage.
Is it just a gimmick then?
To a certain extent. But I mean, what you can do is, if you are measuring daily, let's say, if you've got one in the gym and you step on it every day and you hold the little handles and it gives you a readout and you take a note of that, over time you can see trends. And there is value in that. I'm not going to deny it. There is absolute value in that. But we have to understand the limitations that these machines have.
I suppose the combination of wearable tech might make that a more powerful proposition than it was, say, 10 years ago, where you would have to actually just note it down yourself in a little diary and say, okay, I was 22%, now I'm 23, then I'm 21. With the tech, I suppose it might have a little bit more benefit that you could just bring up a graph or something like that.
That's right. And actually, like, several clients do tend to show me kind of their graphs of their home scale that they take, and it automatically talks to their phone, and that kind of updates into their health app. So and you can kind of start to see trends like that, but you also see the everyday, like it's going like this, and that's that's disheartening.
So with that, you'd see trends as well, because like I was going to ask a similar question, like, can you just use it daily, and then you're using the same machine? It might not be accurate, but it's going to, as long as you use it, if you're using different machines, you're going to get different results, right? But as long as you're using the same scales, you're going to get a kind of, like you say, a trend. But it doesn't tell you really where you're at, does it? Like, you're like a DEXA machine will tell you what you like, where you are health wise, basically, whereas this machine is just going to say you're going in the right direction, but it doesn't basically tell you that you're being healthy, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So because we don't get an absolute figure, and whereas we do know that for health there are some absolute figures. We know that American Council of Exercise recommends that below 20% body fat would be ideal for any age group. You're never going to get a figure that you can relate to that 20% figure from one of these scales. I have one myself. I have for many years. I still get on it. I still laugh. It tells me that I'm 29.9% body fat the other day, and I know from a DEXA that that's more than 15% out. So
wow, that's big then.
So I mean, so from, if that's the technology that the bathroom scale uses, you said this sort of electrical impedance calculation, what does a DEXA scan do, and how does a DEXA scan work?
So so one final point on the bioelectrical, and that is also think about where it's collecting the information, and that is effectively, if you've got a normal scale, there are two collection points. So while the bigger machines might have some validation on overall body fat percentage, usually these machines will say things like the visceral fat. We're calling this an experimental feature, or it's in beta or something like that. There's no kind of evidence base for some of these more specific measurements that they give. And if you think about what it's doing, if it's sending a current up one leg and down the other, how on earth is it going to measure specifically how much fat you have in your midsection? So that was just the final point on that. Yeah.
James's hammers in the background there, and I'm going to point to it. It's not an acronym. We've got an acronym thing to say, like, just in case we lose people on this. What's visceral fat, just for people listening?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, good point. So visceral fat is, I'm worried about that hammer.
We just hold this up. We just hold this up when we want things explained. That's
yeah. If you explain it incorrectly, it'll appear on your screen.
So visceral fat is that we've got two broad types of fat in the body. Subcutaneous fat is the one that everyone talks about most of the time. That is the fat that you can see. It's the fat that you can pinch if you want to be doing that. Anything that is kind of just under the skin and wobbles and things like that, all of that is subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat you cannot see, feel, or touch. It is within the abdominal cavity in particular. So it is underneath your abdominals and underneath all of the muscle layers. You can't really see it. But it sits in and around your organs, in particular around your small intestine, just outside the liver. And what the research is kind of saying now is that visceral fat in particular is a much better predictor of your overall health, and in particular your cardiovascular risk, than subcutaneous fat. And some very recent studies are actually looking at the ratio of visceral fat to subcutaneous fat. So, people who are holding a lot of subcutaneous fat, but also have a relatively high visceral fat level, is less problematic than someone who's got very low subcutaneous fat, but is holding a lot of visceral fat. So the ratio of those two, in just the most like the 2020-21 studies, that ratio is starting to be reported.
That's interesting. So it's a bit like cholesterol ratio sort of thing. It's similar and a similar thing. So is it does it work both ways then? Say, because you get the term, I'm going to use it, is skinny fat, right? But you get that term, so people can look like they're not overweight, but they've got a lot of visceral fat. So there could be health problems down the line with that.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other way around? Can you have not loads, but can you have more subcutaneous fat and less in a small amount of visceral fat? Can that happen?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, and by and large, huge generalization, but women, have a greater tendency, and one of the things that we measure is where people put their fat.
Yeah,
have a greater tendency to have fat stored in the lower limbs, so around the thighs, and therefore they've actually got less of a propensity to put on fat around the midsection, and therefore less propensity to have visceral fat. So they generally have lower visceral fat than men. Some men who are kind of erring on that type of fat deposition also can have lower visceral fat. But as you sort of said, men who have a much more typical kind of male deposition of fat, which pushes all the fat up around the belly, they can have, even if the rest of them is quite small, is not, they don't have a whole lot of subcutaneous fat, they can potentially put on a lot of visceral fat, and that alone can kind of cause them to be in a risk factor for cardiovascular disease.
Cool. So if I do actually hold up the acronym hammer and ask, what does DEXA stand for? What is a DEXA scan?
Yeah, so I mean, it stands for dual energy X-ray absorbiometry. So what that breaks down to.
Okay.
See why they shortened it.
Yeah.
So what that breaks down to is it's an X-ray machine, and it's an X-ray machine that will fire 2 energy X-rays in through you. And as you've experienced, James, so the way that this works is you lie on a bed, and this arm kind of comes above and below you, and the main stuff is actually going on below. So the X-ray is generated from below, and it will move down your body and pixel by pixel, fire tiny X-rays, 2 tiny X-rays, each pixel, through your body. One of those X-rays has got an energy that goes straight through the muscle and the fat, and is stopped by the bone. So it kind of picks up in every pixel how much bone is in that particular pixel. The other energy X-ray kind of goes straight through the muscle, but it picks up the fat. So so it's stopped specifically by the fat. So these are different kind of wavelengths, if you think of it like that. So that one will then kind of go through every pixel and say, okay, well, how much fat is in this pixel? And so you build up this picture, pixel by pixel, area by area, and it works. And the absorbiometry means it in a similar way to the bioelectrical impedance. The sensor, which is above you, detects how much of that X-ray has made it through. And by detecting that, it's able to kind of tell you how much bone, how much fat is in in that particular pixel, and by extension, how much muscle, which is everything else. So by building up that whole picture of you, and part of the DEXA scan, you do get an image that shows you which are the fat bits, which are the muscle bits, which are the bone. By building
so
that
it's
up,
something like a liver counted as muscle, in this DEXA scan.
Yeah, that's right. So the DEXA, as I said, explicitly measures bone and explicitly measures fat, and everything else is called lean mass. So the lean mass in, let's say, your abdominal region is mostly your organs. Whereas the lean mass out in your arms and your shoulders and your legs, that's almost exclusively muscle. So that's how a DEXA works. So it kind of builds up this picture of you, effectively adds it all together, and is able to then sort of say, well, what proportion did we get that was fat, and what proportion was bone, and everything else, that kind of goes into that.
So you mentioned earlier, I think that the majority of the vast majority of DEXA scans or units or machines in the UK are owned by the NHS, and they're used in medical settings, or private medical settings, for DEXA scans. So I think the majority of use, I think you told me when I met you, from a medical perspective, they tend to use DEXAs mainly for diagnosing or looking for osteoporosis and osteopenia and stuff like that, isn't it? The bone density side of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And as you said, 90, if not 99% of DEXAs are used almost exclusively for that. So it's the kind of thing, like, you've got to be, if you want anything other than that, if you want composition and things like that, you'd have to be very careful about where you go, because otherwise they'll just do a bone scan on you and say your bones are fine. What are you on about?
Yeah. So what do you find most people, who tends to come to you? What kind of person would come and use your service and kind of pay for this to be done privately? And what kind of information are they usually after?
So there's kind of definitely several kind of categories of people that come in. Without a doubt, one category is kind of young fitness enthusiasts, bodybuilder types who are chasing very, very low body fat percentages. And that's what they want to know. They want to know, what's my body fat percentage? How much leaner can I get? And how am I going to get there? So that's kind of part of it. A second category, are people like sports people, particularly sports people for whom weight is a factor. I get a number of people in combat sports coming in. They'll come in at 85 kilos and say, so I want to fight in like a 68 kilo category. What do you reckon? Do I have enough fat to lose, or am I losing muscle? So people trying to kind of assess what the limits are for them without losing too much strength. We definitely have a category of just your very kind of new person to fitness, or someone who is kind of looking into their health, well-being for the first time, and they want to understand exactly where they are. The level of data that you get from a DEXA scan goes kind of well beyond what kind of doctors can kind of tell you as far as compositions goes. Of course, essential stats like cholesterol and blood sugars and things, these are also incredibly important factors for all of that. But for understanding things like visceral fat, there's literally no way other than a DEXA scan to get an assessment of your visceral fat. And unless somebody does that for you, you don't really know. It is just guesswork, and just more generally, anyone who is looking into starting a fitness regime for the first time, or about to undertake some kind of transformation or something along those lines, they sometimes are referred by their personal trainer to sort of say, look, it'd be really good for you to sort of see how effective this training is, to get a measurement before and after. So it's a number of different kind of categories of people, really, and they're all after quite different things.
So what do you, based on this kind of potentially quite far-reaching populations of people, I'm sure you see young and old, and male, female, etc., and very athletic to the unathletic. What are you looking for? What are the markers that you are suggesting should fall within the norms, that should obviously some athletes are looking for extremes, so someone like a bodybuilder, I'd be interested in how lean can you go, because some of them walk on stage and they can't even walk properly because the soles of their feet have no fat on, so they can go very extreme. But how are you advising people, and what are you looking for specifically in order to do your job?
Yeah, so excellent question. So the number one figure that I think a lot of people come in looking to find is the body fat percentage, because they may have read somewhere or seen somewhere some basic kind of ideas of what body fats should be. However, the number one figure, and this is what I kind of picked up with you, James, the number one figure that I tend to look for first, and even more so as a person gets older, is what's happening with their muscle mass. For what I've found through experience is that a higher overall level of muscle mass, if someone's looking to make changes in their composition or in their life, or they want to feel stronger, all of that kind of stuff, the overall level of muscle mass is a really good predictor of, if they want to make big changes, how successful are they going to be with those changes. And even if they don't want to make big changes, and they want a predictor of how well and strong and energetic they're going to kind of feel, over the next 10 years, 20 years, tracking that muscle mass is really important. And that's actually probably the number one thing that I kind of look at.
How do you, so it's a little one that's just got me in my head, because the amount of YouTube videos that pop up about natty or natural, natty or on steroids, you must see with those populations, particularly the more athletic and maybe the less regulated, sports like bodybuilding, where you get insane amounts of muscle mass.
Yeah.
So how are you dealing with that kind of data? Because that's going to throw you, because you're going to see very high levels of muscle mass with people who are on steroids or in testosterone, things like that. So how are you interpreting that kind of data?
Well, as far as interpretation goes, the main figure, the one that James quoted is a lean mass index, sometimes called the fat-free mass index. And it's a measure, if you know anything about BMI, so BMI is measured in kilograms of your weight divided by your height squared. The fat-free mass index or the lean mass index is the same thing, but only counting your lean mass, so only counting your muscle. So when I see a fat-free mass index or a lean mass index above, 26, 27, I sort of start to kind of going, what's going on here? Like most people would not be able to put on that kind of level of mass for their height, just because the body has its own kind of limitation factors that kind of come into play with not putting on too much muscle. But funnily enough, when it comes to things like steroids, like I occasionally get people in who are very lean, massive amounts of muscle, but visceral fat is actually quite high, way higher than one would expect. Now testosterone and its effects on visceral fat, the fact that men tend to put fat on around their midsection, it is kind of one of the kind of impacts of testosterone. So someone who kind of comes in really, really lean at 7%, but their visceral fat is quite high, the antennas certainly go up, and it gets mentioned. But it's not about judging them. It's about kind of relaying the stats, relaying the impact that they might not be aware of.
It's funny you say that. Like, I'm not trying to wind anyone up or anything like that, but it's not about like judging people and stuff like that. However, on Instagram and stuff like that, that's what people think a healthy physique looks like, don't they? And it's banded around like, if you look like this, you're going to be really healthy. And it's like, well, it's not necessarily the case, is it? So I just wanted to put that out there.
Well, that's that'll sort out the troll on YouTube who said we're just an average guy. What they don't know is what's going on inside.
No,
that's
exactly.
Where the real performance is.
So yeah, like, actually, yes, that's I'll listen to that, he won't listen.
So Owen, I just wondered for most of our listeners, they're kind of people, probably over 40, over 50, interested in leading a more sort of healthy, energetic kind of life, more active and that sort of thing. The other thing that you did when I was there was this 3D body map, which was really interesting as well. And like you said, it's kind of a bit funny when you actually can sort of spin yourself around on a screen and look at yourself from every angle and things. It's not something we usually get to do. But what can you talk to us just a little bit about what that is? And like you mentioned, that actually complements the DEXA quite well. But the process that goes to create that image, and then what you get from that image. Because I know you also talked a bit about sort of posture and things from that image that you got as well, which was really interesting.
Yeah, that's right. So, the 3D body map is, it's a much simpler piece of kit than the DEXA. I mean, what we've got is a booth. It looks just like a kind of a fairly standard photo booth, except you stand, you don't sit. There are 20 different cameras, infrared cameras, and an infrared dot sprayer that, and each of them is taking an image over the course of about 10 seconds, an image of you that then gets stitched together into an overall picture. So that picture is, it's in full 3D, so you're able to view yourself from any angle. And along the way, it takes all of your circumference measurements. So one of the values in that is kind of, let's say, someone is looking to put on muscle, or they're looking, sometimes I get bodybuilders who are sort of say, oh, I want to develop my upper chest, or it's lagging. We can kind of take slices through the body, just to sort of see what the shape is doing at all sorts of, at any height. But as you sort of said, the real, besides circumference measurements, the real value is in this postural assessment. So, and this is not about demonizing any particular posture as bad or any other posture as particularly good, but there are certain markers that can be predictive of pain patterns if they haven't developed, being about to develop. So what the kinds of things that we're talking about are, a particularly anteriorly tilted pelvis, for example, or a particularly sharp curvature in the neck when looking from the side. Sort of, if the neck curvature is doing a little V shape, then what we're seeing is possibly a daily position or practice where someone is really kind of sitting at their computers with their neck craned. Doing that front to back all the way down, looking at the hip position, looking at the head position, looking at what's happening in the thoracic spine. Is the lumbar spine kind of too deep a curvature there? All of these things we were able to see just from someone kind of standing still for a moment and then being able to kind of snap that and look at it from any angle. There are definite trends of what I see most of. I mostly see kind of necks that are, have been looking down for far too long, or that are kind of craning forward. I see hips that are anteriorly tilted quite a lot. Just
quickly, Owen, if you can just explain to everyone what you mean by anteriorly tilted hips.
Yeah, so if you imagine your pelvis as kind of holding, like, a glass of water in the middle of it. The pelvis is a round cage. If it's tilted and that glass of milk that you're holding in it would leak out to the front, then that's an anteriorly tilted pelvis. So what it tends to look like in practice is a person who's got a very deep spinal curvature down in their lumbar spine. Their bum might be sticking out, and they might be kind of look a little bit like a gorilla at the front, sort of like that kind of very long abdominal thing with and everything's kind of just a little bit dipped over their legs. And it tends to come from sometimes weak abdominals, weak glutes, or everyone's favorite tight hip flexors. So these kind of things can actually stop people in feeling good about their general movement if they're not kind of addressed in some way. And the good thing about the 3D is that it can pick up kind of quite subtle levels of these things. So it needn't be a problem now, but we can kind of say, look, you're doing something that's, really tightening up your hip flexors, or you might want to just start to think about stretching those out a bit more than you have.
Since you started, have you seen, or maybe even in the evidence, have you seen trends in terms of, I suppose there's a couple of metrics, really. The first one would be, have you seen people's body fat percentage of muscle mass and bone density change negatively over the last kind of, God knows, as long as you've been in business, but also from the data. But have you also seen where the deposits of fat, etc., change? So, for example, suggestions that if people drink a lot of beer, they're exposed to more estrogen and things like that. So, are you seeing changes like that at all?
So over the course of the pandemic, I've definitely seen some changes. I mean, without a doubt, there are a huge number of people who kind of came in post-pandemic, who had come in kind of just pre-pandemic or in the early days, whose body composition has overall been negatively affected. It's been a very, very challenging time for people's fitness and health generally. So yeah, without a doubt, I mean, we're talking lower muscle mass, slightly lower bone density. Bones do tend to take a bit longer to shift, plus and minus. So not so much of a trend on the bones, but definitely muscle mass down and body fat up has been quite a common story. The distribution that you spoke about. So generally speaking, what I find is that a person's distribution is relatively fixed. So unless they go and do something that changes their hormonal profile, you mentioned estrogen, so go and do something that changes their ratio of testosterone to estrogen or anything along those lines, their deposition of fat tends to be pretty similar. So a woman who I would kind of call is very estrogen dominant as far as her deposition of fat goes. So in other words, very, very little fat around the midsection in the what we call the android area. So the area that men typically put on fat, which is around the midsection, they call that the android area. And the area that women put on fat, which is around the thighs, they call that the gynoid area. So if a woman is, very estrogen dominant, then she will put on most of her fat around the thighs, and her upper body might be very lean indeed. And if that's her pattern, then short of the balance of her hormones changing, that's unlikely to change. So what we can kind of predict is like, okay, if you're about to, embark upon a fat loss regime, what you can expect is probably you'll see it coming off first in the upper body before you really see the thighs start to move. So it's about kind of warning people what they're in for, what is the likely path as well. So that said, and I've not been doing this long enough to have seen someone like premenopausal and then postmenopausal, but with the changes in hormonal output that occur during the menopause, that might be one kind of instance where a woman's body might change quite dramatically over that in shape and in terms of deposition.
Can I just ask, we're going to kind of wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so. So I'm already thinking what we'll probably need to do, if possible, is get you on again in the new year and talk more about the performance side of testing that you do, the things like the resting metabolic rate, the VO2 max testing that you do, and the other performance tests. But to kind of round this episode off, in terms of the bone density, the information you get from a DEXA scan, bone density. I mean, you just mentioned menopause there. I mean, obviously, regardless of menopause or perimenopause, I think we had a discussion around most women and most people in general, as they get older, strength training becomes so much more important. I know you obviously already mentioned that one of the things you give a lot of importance on or weight to is the muscle, the overall muscle that people have, and obviously strength training done correctly also impacts the bone mineral density and the thickness of bones. But what do you look at for the kind of the bone density side of the DEXA scan? What are your kind of red flags, or when people are doing pretty well, what kind of measurements do you use for that?
Yeah, so the bone density that we do is kind of an overall bone density. So because it's all done in the one scan, we get the entire body, and we're able to break down, what's your bone density in your left ribs, in your right ribs, left arm, left leg, right leg, pelvis, thoracic spine, lumbar spine. So things that are red flags you mentioned, young people with poor bone density, that shouldn't happen. That really shouldn't happen. Obviously, we do get a number of older people coming in who are very concerned about their bones, and it's one of those things. It's okay to have light bones. People will will have lighter than average bones, and that's fine. There are certain levels. So there is something called a T-score, which kind of compares your bone density to that of a 30-year-old person, a healthy 30-year-old. When your T-score falls below a certain level, we can't kind of diagnose you, but we can sort of say, look, this is a problem. You should take this to your GP and get the more specific scans that they do on the NHS, which will be like a specific DEXA. It's the same machine, but a specific DEXA on their lumbar spine or on the neck of their femur. So we can kind of like highlight those kind of things. But for anything less, like if someone just got lighter than average bones, exactly as you said, resistance training makes a huge difference. I have seen someone's bone density come up 6 or 7%, and their T-score go from in what would be called osteopenia, so the thinning of the bones, not quite osteoporosis, which is the worst, but a thinning of the bones. They've taken it from that to pretty much average bone density over the course of a year, just through for the first time, picking up some weights and doing some resistance training. So it's really valuable on that front.
Excellent. I think, like I say, we are a little bit pushed for time now, and if you're happy to, Owen, we would love to get you back on, because this has been it's actually been a lovely conversation, to be honest. It's been nice to listen to you talk and to ask you questions, and yeah, like I say, to dive into more of those performance specific tests that you also do. But Pete, do you have anything you'd like to say, or any questions for Owen before he goes?
Well, I haven't got any questions because that'll keep us going, won't it? But I have, but I'll ask them on the next one.
Yeah.
But no, I've learned loads there. I found that really interesting, and this is good, because this is a thing that a lot of people ask about and then don't listen anyway. They'll ask about stuff like you say, like the home scales and all that. Are they any good? And you'll say, well, not really, but they'll go and get them anyway, just because it makes them feel better and what have you. And people like to spend money, don't they? But yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the muscle mass thing, is huge. I listened to Tracy mentioned after the podcast last week about Mark Rifkin's lecture on sarcopenia, which I'll have in podcast world last week. I'll have put that in the notes. But I watched it and it's brilliant, and it's a big deal because it happens to everybody, right? Well, it does, but it doesn't have to, if you know what I mean. So like strength training and what have you is just all around good for you, isn't it? And we know that. And people are worried about bulking up, aren't they? And becoming like Arnie and what have you. And it's like, yeah, well, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just start lifting stuff, you know what I mean? So and obviously the bone density that comes with that as like a byproduct, and then possibly, like we talk about this all the time, and possibly the lifestyle change from just thinking like, actually, do you know what, this makes me feel a bit better, I might go a little bit further down the rabbit hole. So it's been really good though. I've learned a lot today. That's it's interesting. I'll be able to explain a little bit more clearly to people, you know, what actually really matters. You know, nice. So thanks for that, Owen. That's been great.
Excellent. Paul, for yourself, anything you'd like to say in conclusion?
I get a lot of questions about bulking up, but I always kind of so it's a bit like, you know, in that scene in Austin Powers where the steamroller is going really slowly towards the henchman. There's plenty of time to get out of the way of bulking up.
Yeah.
It's just so slow, you know. It's yeah, I mean, the amount of kind of pain and suffering that those bathroom scales cause people, you know, it's nothing quite like a measuring tape when it comes to things like that. And I do see the value of something like the body fat percentage and muscle mass and bone density. If you're going to make judgments about or you're going to make decisions about the effective route whether you're on an effective route or not, or the best route for you, you've got to do it properly, because otherwise you're just working on bad knowledge and bad data. And there's nothing worse than bad data, because we make bad decisions with bad data. So, you know, I think it's great to hear your perspective. And I think because you're seeing such varied populations, you're going to be able to see what works. Because ultimately, the body is not going to lie. You know, there's going to be more muscle mass if someone is strength training. There's going to be high levels of body fat percentage based on sedentary lifestyles. And you'll be able to just prove, and you'll be able to say, look, it isn't just your metabolism. It isn't just this. It isn't that. You know, your actions are actually having something real. They're having a real life consequence. And we can see it. And we have the evidence to back it up that it's true. Because otherwise, I mean, I've had clients on the phone times going, I'm up by 5%, it's all going wrong. I'm like, you know, just calm down, you know, just make sure you've gone to the toilet or not eaten a meal or drunk a pint of water or something like that. So, but look, I mean, I'd be interested to get one of these things. I'm in London as well, so at some point I better go in lean, otherwise I'll just get annoyed. I better do some work.
But yeah, I mean, on that measurement, like it's just, you know, we can't scan anyone more than like more frequently than 8 weeks apart. So and usually I recommend 3 months is a good time. So for a lot of people, it's a little bit freeing to know that there will be a check-in, you know, but it frees them from the day-to-day panic of, oh my God, I'm up half a kilo, you know. And that's, you know, that, as we know, you know, we need to try and get people to let go of those fluctuations, because there are 500 things that can happen in the body that can affect all of that.
So, Owen, before we go, if people want to find out more about you and what you do, and they're based, you know, somewhere near London or the Southeast, or just people are interested in the information you put out around assessments and scans and that sort of thing, how can people find you and follow what you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got all of the information on all of the scans that we've got, and all of those coming up on our website, which is myvitalmetrics.com. That's all one word, myvitalmetrics.com. We're pretty active on our Instagram page as well, which is it hashtag myvitalmetrics?
At myvitalmetrics.
myvitalmetrics.
Yeah.
And yeah, so between those two, those are probably the best ways to get in touch with us, or to find more information.
Excellent. And then obviously people that, you know, I've been to see Owen, and people that I work with at Unique Results and things, we're going to be setting up a kind of a partnership with Owen and getting people involved who want to get those scans done. And obviously, like you say, Paul is in London as well. I'm sure Paul will come by and see you as well. So I just want to say thank you guys to everyone who's been listening. We are coming up to the end of the year. Next week is it'll be Christmas Eve next week. And we're going to have a special episode just with Peter, Paul and myself discussing all things festive and Christmassy. And then I think we've got someone else lined up for New Year's Eve to take us into the next year. And like I say, we will get Owen back on because I think there's so much there that we can talk about the performance side as well. So thank you. If you've enjoyed the episode or what we do in general, please do share, like, and subscribe to the Health Oddity podcast. Please do share it with friends. And if you're listening on a platform that allows you to leave a review as well. We do have our Facebook group, which is just Health Oddity. If you search groups on Health Oddity and click on join that, and we will let you in to the group. And I think that's just about it. Say goodbye, Mr. Peter Lance.
Ta-ra!
I thought you were just going to wave there and not say anything. Say goodbye, Mr. Paul Bassett.
Bye. Just if every person listening shared this podcast, we'd become massive. Just think about it. Just share it on Facebook. Everyone, do it.
Share it around and certainly follow at My Vital Metrics on Instagram and check out their website, myvitalmetrics.com. And say goodbye, Mr. Owen Hutchins.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.